Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Finding Nemo from 2003. Finding Nemo was a massive success. It was the first Pixar film to be released in the summer. All the previous ones, at least in America, had been released around Thanksgiving or in November or Christmas and such. And Finding Nemo was considered actually a risk when it was coming out in the summer. No one was actually sure how a Pixar movie would do in the summer, and clearly after how successful and how much of a big phenomenon Finding Nemo was, no one doubted that again. It was frankly everywhere. If you were around in 2003, and I'm sure most of you grew up with this movie and watching it a ton of times, everyone was absolutely obsessed with it. It was the second highest grossing movie of the year. It's still like close to $1 billion in grosses worldwide, and it was really a behemoth of a Pixar film. For a while, if you talk to anyone about Pixar, they'd say, oh, I love Finding Nemo. They wouldn't even say anything else. It was just that immediate of a hit and such recognition from the public. And as an animation fan at the time who was in college and a huge Pixar fan, I was a little surprised and maybe even a little, turned off by the fact at how much it was embraced by the public over other Pixar films that I felt were maybe better or more deserving of that attention. And as much as myself and a lot of people at the time kind of just felt like this film just kind of steamrolled over everything Pixar was doing at the time and became this just like huge, massive animated classic before we could have our say about it, it was kind of like this film that I think a lot of people who liked animation at the time kind of rolled their eyes at. They're like, oh yeah, you fucking like Finding Nemo, that's great. And I guess I understand the whole idea of something when it becomes so enormous like Shrek becoming so annoying and you kind of just want to disregard it and not talk about how good a movie possibly can be, but not counting Shrek in that. And Finding Nemo is a film that, even as big of a snob as you can be, a Pixar snob, are there those? Probably. And were we doing that? Yes, we were. I still have always been able to put it on and go, well, you know, it was really popular, but it is fucking great. And I think Finding Nemo, there's something about it that almost everyone can relate to. It's so immediate in how you get it, but so smart in how it's done. I don't think mainstream films are done in such a way that you can just immediately understand what's going on with the characters. There's a certain deep emotionalness to it, and I don't think Pixar's really done it as well as in Finding Nemo in terms of getting a whole audience involved in that. Not that they haven't in other films. I think the other Pixar films do that in different ways and have different really interesting things about them. All the Pixar films obviously play to a big audience, but this one I think is just so immediate. When I was watching it this time, it struck me how easy it kind of felt. I think there's certain ones like Stanton's later Wall-E or Inside Out from last year or Toy Story or any of them that you kind of go, oh wow, that's really interesting. Oh, it's really risky. Oh, they did this. I can't believe they got The Incredibles is basically Watchmen for kids or something. And then you watch Finding Nemo and you go, oh, well, yeah, of course people like that. And sure, that is lame to think that. And I get that, but there's a certain art to that. And every time I watch Finding Nemo, I'm kind of in awe of how well they made a mainstream film and how wonderful that is, and just how amazing and well structured this film tells its beautiful story. Marlin, who after a very traumatic experience where most of the eggs of his children are killed and his wife, is just with his son Nemo, who has a very small fin and a very large fin. He's off to take him to his first day of school at fish school, I guess. I don't know how the fish education system works, but Nemo goes to school and it's going okay, although Marlin is very worried. And then Nemo goes off with his friends from the class and Marlin catches them, and then he goes off to prove that he is a bigger man by touching the butt so all the kids can laugh, but also to show that he can do things without his dad, but unfortunately gets caught and is whisked away to a dentist's office in Australia. And Marlin goes off to try to find his son and hopefully get his family back together, while also running into Dory, who has short-term memory loss, and they go on an adventure together so Marlin can get his son Nemo back home and safe from all the dangers of the ocean that they will then experience through their journey to find him. The real key to this film is transparency, and that's not me talking about the water that is in all of this movie. That is me talking about the way this film is set up, and I've read a lot of screenwriting essays and books, particularly about how the beginning of this film works. And it's really actually fairly ingenious. And it's interesting, Andrew Stanton almost changed how the opening of this film was, and I'm so glad he didn't do that because I don't think this film would have been the hit it was. But that opening where you have Marlon and his wife, which is, I'll try to talk about without crying or something, because the opening is heartbreaking. You immediately understand where Marlon's coming from. There's no part in Finding Nemo where you go, why is this guy such a fucking dick? I mean, sure, he's a dick, but you get why he's a dick. And there's a difference between you see someone on the street and you're like, why is that guy such a dick? But then you meet someone and you're like, oh, I know why that guy's a dick. It's this whole story. This like barracuda came and killed his wife, and you're like, a barracuda? When would that happen? And I go, barracudas don't really attack people. I mean, assuming they do. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But the point is immediately that character development is instantly set up, and it's an important story moment. You understand why Nemo is so important to him. Sure, you get like, hey, he's his dad, that's his kid, but it intensifies that. So that journey, you understand why he will go through hell to get his son, why it means so much to him. Instantly, the audience understands that. There's no hidden gimmicks. They're not trying to do something super arty or something. It's a really ingenious screenwriting thing. When you look at Finding Nemo and what it does in that beginning, it's just so smart because the rest of the film works in that way. And apparently Andrew Stanton wanted that to come in at the end originally, which if you ever see John Carter, there's certain sequences in that where he basically just reveals something at the worst time. And it shows that all his terrible screenwriting ideas kind of came out through John Carter. And I'm not just saying that because it bombed. That movie has a lot of story problems. But Finding Nemo, the way they told that story so perfectly, and I don't know if it's so much everyone else involved in the Pixar brain trust or Bob Peterson and David Reynolds, who also helped write the story with Andrew Stanton. But if they had revealed that later, you wouldn't really like Marlon, and you wouldn't really get why Albert Brooks is being so ridiculous. Sure, he's the dad and that's his kid, and you understand that, and everyone can have that universal thing, but context is really important. And understanding what a parent went through to get to that point and understanding their journey to that point, it kind of means a lot more to you. I think that's why this film was such a big hit, because suddenly someone could be like, they could think, oh, my sister went to all these fertility drugs and she always wanted a kid and she could only really have this one, and how much it means to her. And it doesn't matter that that kid's a brat and ugly. We're gonna love that kid because it meant so much. Understanding what that family went through. And so you almost understand, you feel like, maybe you, in actuality you probably don't, but you feel like you understand that journey. And understanding that journey is why this movie is so big. The success of this film, oddly enough, they could call it Finding Nemo or Finding Dory. It's Marlin, you know? They're not going to call the film Finding Marlin because that's like, I love Albert Brooks, but sorry, no one's going to see that. But he's kind of the secret weapon who's not really secret. It's not secret at all. He's the drive of the film. And if you understand why the drive is going, you're going to stick with it. And it's kind of beautiful. While watching it, I was like so interested in the Nemo story. I understand part of that is him growing up and realizing how to do things and thinking on his own and learning through being in these rough situations that his dad would never put him in, who his dad never had faith in him to let him do that, and that he was actually a lot smarter than everyone thought he was. With Marlin, it's more complicated. It's not just that he loves Nemo and the thing at the beginning, but also that they even talk about when he gets to the school that they barely see him after the anemone. Did I say it right? I sound like the kid when he's trying to say it. Like that he's just never really had friends, and that he meets Dory and he cares about Dory. And then there are certain times I do feel like it actually gets arty, but since you trust it at a certain point, when he picks up Nemo and you think he's dead, you just see him holding the egg in his fin. It's more powerful, and maybe that's a little pretentious in some ways, but I actually think it was quite beautiful. It really hit me. Obviously, Andrew Stanton's real arty animated film is WALL-E, and WALL-E has the whole sequence without dialogue for like 30 minutes, and that's wonderful. Andrew Stanton, people respected him and knew he was a big director, knew he had control over an audience. It does a lot of non-risky things that you have to be a really smart writer to pull off. I mean, how many movies do you see they hit people the way they do, like Finding Nemo does? And that takes a really ingenious storyteller. I think it's a little underrated how important it is to really break through and make a really powerful and very well-made, audience-pleasing film that's actually good, that is actually well-crafted. I don't think we're really used to it, so maybe that's not exactly why we don't exactly know where to put Finding Nemo in that. It's kind of not cool to think of the studio film working king in today's film and animation world. And you know, I should preface, I was friends with a lot of animators when this came out in the aftermath of the DVD. This was such a huge DVD. I mean, this was right when DVD was really hitting. I read on the Wikipedia, it said it's the best-selling DVD of all time. I was around that and almost everyone had it. Every kid had it. I watched it at a party and I remember having the DVD on for too long and there's a voice that says, turn off the DVD, or the DVD menu, I mean. Just everyone had it, and that's how I ended up seeing it, through cousins, through parties, through babysitting kids. You just kept seeing this movie. Almost everyone saw this movie 20 times by 2005. There was just no way to avoid Finding Nemo. I had so many friends who were like, no, The Incredibles, or Monsters Inc., or Toy Story. And the one thing I've kind of learned from watching it and watching it so many times on DVD in the following years of the early to mid 2000s is that, like, who the fuck cares which Pixar movie is the best? Doesn't really matter. Frankly, I think it's a good problem to have that we're debating which one's the best. Especially at the time, we didn't realize how spoiled we were, considering Cars and Cars 2, and we didn't realize how many sequels there were going to be and all that stuff. It's like, it doesn't matter, and I think we were missing the point, and I feel bad about that. I remember seeing this film with my friend Russ and my sister and her friend Val, I believe, and we saw it super late, which is pretty rare. The only Pixar film I've seen, like, not in the opening weekend or around then, and no one was in the theater, and my friend Russ laid down in the aisle and just put his hands behind his head in a theater in Ocean City, Maryland. And I remember just how beautiful the light was from the ocean. And this is probably one of the first things, and Paleo Steno, a friend of mine, mentioned that in his review. It actually brings up a good point. It was something I was thinking about during when I was watching it, but Paleo kind of reminded me, so credit to him. I noticed how lighting has become such a big thing in computer animated films, and I think this maybe is actually the first one that you can really notice it during. And it's the first one where it looks so beautiful and you can absolutely tell, like, what time of day matters, the moods of the lighting in it, and how that became a big deal. And maybe this is the first one to really do that, or it's the first one where it's very noticeable and really doing amazing things. The color palette in this film isn't really as complicated, and part of me thinks maybe that's why it became such a big hit as well, because you don't really have as many colors. I was looking in the art of book and they mentioned how there's not really a lot of colors, and they're a little worried about what they were doing with it, because you look at something like Monsters Inc., the film they had made before, there's a lot of colors in that, or Toy Story, or Bug's Life. And this is a little more simplified because you have a lot of just like deep blue, and you have Nemo and Dory, and the fish aren't a ton of different palettes of colors. It's kind of so simple. I think it goes into the storytelling of the film and how that really works for it. This is obviously the film that kind of launched Andrew Stanton. It's the first film he really directed as kind of the headliner. Obviously Lee Ulrich co-directed it. Whatever that means in terms of Pixar is always very confusing to almost everyone. And even though Andrew Stanton helped write Toy Story and was really a part of all the early films, he was the second one after Pete Docter to really start directing films and kind of the auteurism of Pixar. I'm probably more of a Pete Docter person, honestly, but I still always liked Andrew Stanton, and this really put him above and beyond and really made him the name after Lasseter until like Brad Bird started. Pete Docter makes movies so infrequently, I feel like he gets forgotten about, but until Inside Out and Up and things like that. But the 1-2 punch of Finding Nemo and WALL-E really gave people a lot of faith in Andrew Stanton, maybe too much because, you know, John Carter. But when I watch his Pixar movies, I was kind of like, yeah, but these are pretty damn good. And I think Finding Nemo especially has a lot of wonderfulness in how great of a mainstream film it is. And I think that's something Pixar has always been really good at, but I think Andrew Stanton, how good he is at doing that, is something that really shouldn't be ever underappreciated. It kind of shows what's important to them, and that's the story and the character, and this is really a film about character. Watching someone grow through their stories and grow through their experience and see them grow as characters, and it's set up so nicely. It's just beautiful. I think this will probably always be a big film of the early 2000s, and it was a big film of the big DVD era. It kind of just reminds me of that era, and although some of the CG at the beginning, I was kind of noticing how it didn't age as well as I thought it would, the story wins me over so early that I kind of forget all about that, and I'm just wrapped up in it. And I think that's the thing people love about Finding Nemo. It wraps you up in the story, and it really doesn't let go. Watching it again, I was like, it's a wonderful movie. I guess there's no way you can just kind of roll your eyes and be like, oh, kids and they're Finding Nemo. But there's a reason this film means something to people, and there's a reason Pixar became more, and why we get disappointed when sequels come out, which I'm hoping Finding Dory Is that disappointing? Finding Nemo is the kind of beautiful, amazing film that is so universal. I've heard people compare this to the National Lampoon vacation movies. You can compare it to a Western. You can compare it to a road movie. You can compare it to so many things because there's so many ideas that are just so universal you can attach it to them. And stuff like that, I think, is something that Pixar is the only studio who could really do as well as they can with this. I don't know if Finding Nemo will ever be my favorite, but when I was watching it, I thought, you know, I would watch this with my niece, or I would watch this with my kids one day, or I could see a kid understanding this and loving it. And I've watched it with kids who do like it and then fall asleep, and I'm the one who's like, well, we'll watch the whole thing and then he can go to bed. I don't know, I kind of just love it for that. And there's certain films I've watched from eras that I used to love, and then I watch them and go, ooh, what was I thinking? And there's certain ones I was like, ugh, what was culture thinking? And when it comes to Finding Nemo, I sit back and I go, I don't know, I kind of get it. I kind of think it's wonderful. I get why everyone wanted to watch it a million times, because that transparency and how lovely it is, and how memorable, and how you probably watched it with your mom and your dad, and you probably left and felt like, you know, maybe you thought your parents really loved you, or maybe you thought, wow, I wish my parents did love me, or maybe just thought, wow, that was an amazing story. Finding Nemo is that type of film that will leave you with that incredible memory and leave you with wanting to see this film more and more and put more memories onto it. And it's kind of universal, kind of transparent way of telling a story lets you do that. And there's not a lot of films that can do that. And, you know, maybe that's why. I think that is why people want that and why people put that onto it, because it's just there. And just being there in the way it is wonderful, and probably why we all trust Pixar as much as we do, and why the public does. I don't think this is a risky film at all. And the thing I think about this is people who understood how to be really great storytellers. And there's no denying when watching this film that Pixar understands storytelling and how to tell a story to a mass audience and get them to actually feel something. It maybe will never be my favorite, but it's always a film that, even if I count it out, will always impress me and always leave me with a heart full of emotions. It just sit there and think, well, I guess Finding Nemo is still pretty good. So if you have seen Finding Nemo and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.